Welcome to Cooking with. We've gathered together all the things we're going to need. We've set our oven preheated to 350. Use parchment paper to line your. Once the cookies come out of the oven, I place them on the rack to cool. That keeps the cookies from getting soggy. So we're ready to go and start cooking. Out of the refrigerator so they could soften. You can also use the microwave to soften your butter. I like to also take the eggs and take them out of the refrigerator an hour before, make them room temperature, and they mix better with the butter and the sugar. When put the dry ingredients into a separate bowl with 2 cups of flour. I want you to notice I'm using this really cute cup measurement, which I love, but I have to be careful because 1 cup is not all the way to the top. 1 cup comes to this line. So be careful with your cups when you're measuring to make sure that you have accurate measurements. When measuring too, I often fill my cup up and then I tap it. And as you can see, as I'm tapping it, it seems like there's less flour taking up the spaces. So you want to make sure that you have the exact amount of flour. Tap your cup along the sides. Check your measurements. I also use a little spoon to even my cup measurement out. Checking on my line. I pack it down a little bit, not heavily packed, but it depends on your area. Some of the flour. So in this case, I took a little too much flour, so I'm going to extract some with my spoon until I have the right measurements, evening it out, and place into the drying. I'm just using, a nondescript baking soda. Baking soda, you can buy it off-brand. It usually doesn't matter. Just make sure that your best use date is you're under that, because it can tend to go bad. And the baking soda is 1 teaspoon. Again, check your measurements so that you have exactly 1 teaspoon. Make sure it says teaspoon and not tablespoon. A lot of people make that mistake. So again, we want to make sure it's level. I use my box top. You can also use a knife to level it off. So I have 1 like this. So again, inside the bag, I level my salt off so I have an exact level part of salt. After I have all the dry ingredients, I tend to do this. Once I'm done with an ingredient, I take it off of the table and place it behind me, so I know that the recipe that I'm covering and not repeating myself. So great. So all our dry ingredients, we whisk them 3 or 4 times, combining 1, 2, try to keep it in the bowl, 2, 3. So do another thing is I have 1 container that I keep all my tools when I'm baking. So I keep it. So now we're ready to do the butter. What I like to do is, again, we've had the butter out, so it's chop it into chunks. That way it's more even. If you try to mix it, even if you have a mixer, it's better if you chop up the butter so that there's greater surface area. If the butter is turned into, 6 or 7 little cubes like this, and the sugar gets better penetration. Oh yes, I forgot to bring in my dish towel. So I always keep a dish towel that's the same color as my bowl, and that's what I use to cover up my bowls, like when I'm making my homemade bread. And because we have an open bowl here with flour in it, I like to cover it. So I will take my kitchen towel that's designated for that. Pick a color that's not the same as your other dish towels. Maybe the same color as your bowls that you use, or like this is my baking apron. And that way you'll remember, and your husband and children can remember that that particular towel is not used for the floor or so the butter should not be melted, but soft enough that you can see if I put my finger in it, it makes a dent. Another thing I also do is I keep a clean cloth near me so that I can clean my hands. So the sugar calls for 3/4 of a cup. I don't have 3/4 of a cup measurement. I just have my nesting. So I have 1/4 measurement here. And so I'll do 3 of these. And so again, I'm careful when I measure my sugar to make sure that I'm up to the line. Because my particular measuring cups, it's not exactly to the top, but I do pack the sugars in. So even in any condition, I like to pack the sugar to make sure I have the right amount, because the sugar tends to be more sticky. So here we go. This is the first one. You can see how well packed it was. Now for the plain sugar, not the brown sugar. Again, being careful that you and the sugar, and now we're going to mix it together. So now you can see I'm mixing the butter and the sugars together. The brown sugar, 3/4 of a cup, and 3/4 of a cup of white sugar. And I am mixing it with 1 cup of butter, softened butter, not melted, but sometimes you can see how the brown sugar has clumped. Make sure that you squish these clumps down and remove them. So I happen to have this vegetable scrubber because I like to wash everything, anything that has a skin on an outer coating, and with to cut through it, because whatever's on the outside gets inside the food. So I just take my eggs and I dry the eggs. So now I'm ready to crack. I also make sure I wash my hands after I'm using the eggs, before and after, because we want to make sure there can be no transfer of bacteria from the surface of the eggs with my hands onto something else. So cracking the eggs, I just use the edge of the bowl. With the egg mixture, once I get blended, I like to use a whisk to whisk the egg in, blending it, making it light and fluffy, adding a lot of air. It has a smooth texture, not so sugary anymore, and so I can remove my whisk, tapping my whisk on the bowl, freeze the batter from the whisk, and I just spin the bowl and tap. Do an edge scraping a couple times while you're mixing it to make sure that the ingredients that got on the edge end up back in the middle. Is the acid and the vanilla to help with the baking soda rising. So again, with your, the 1 teaspoon, make sure you have the teaspoon measurement. I never pour over your bowl with your dough in it, because you could ruin the whole thing with a simple pour. So pour it over your surface or over a cup. Stir the vanilla into your ingredients, your butter, your sugar, your eggs, and your... So now we're ready for the dry ingredients and the secret ingredient. So the secret ingredient is Jell-O pudding mix. So I add the 3 tablespoons of the Jell-O pudding to my moist, buttery, sugar, vanilla mixture. And I mix it in. So now we're ready to add the dry ingredients, the flour, the salt, and the baking soda into our buttery mixture with the secret ingredient. So the consistency is a very sticky dough. And we're now ready to add the chocolate chips. The chocolate chips come in 12-ounce bags like this. And I pour the chocolate chips into the batter. So it looks like this. And again, I'm mixing the batter around. It's interesting because I have a really nice KitchenAid mixer, but I seem to always want to make chocolate chip cookies by hand. I seem to not pull my mixer out. So you can see how the chocolate chips have been blended in. So every spoonful of batter has many chocolate chips in it. You don't want to have it where you have a cookie that doesn't have chocolate. So at this time, I like to check to make sure that all the ingredients that I was supposed to add to my mixture are ready to go onto the pan. So I actually turn around and check with the recipe to make sure that I have used everything that I was supposed to do. My recipe happens to be written down here with the secret ingredient. So I make sure, yes, we add the flour. So we're ready to go to put it on the parchment paper. And I like to use a large spoon to do this. And I scoop out a portion of the cookie dough onto the spoon. And I try my best to keep it equal. Some people like to measure each one because when you're cooking it, some of the cookies won't be cooked if they're bigger and then a small one. And the small ones will burn if you wait for the big ones. So I try to keep a heaping teaspoon, if I can get a little closer so you can see, and try to keep that consistent size. So we have our dough placed, it's about 1.5 inches apart onto the baking sheet, if you can see, ready to go. If you find that you think, like I think this one here is not as filled, you can always scoop a little bit of dough onto your spoon and then just add it to your scoop. Also, sometimes people like to make them a shape. They get the rough corners off, and in your oven. Again, my hand cloth only used for my hands, and my cover towel. I'm going to put my supplies back in the bucket, and then I'm going to cover my cookie dough because I have more cookie dough to go. And we are going to now place this in the 350-degree oven in the middle rack of the oven. So checking my oven, the timer's gone off. Your cookies should be golden brown and kind of wrinkled on top. So now the cookies are hot out of the oven and they look and smell delicious. And so what I do is I just gently separate them from each other. Sometimes you can come from the top with your spatula. I like using a plastic spatula so I don't scratch my pan or break through the parchment paper. With great success, you have now completed making chocolate chip cookies. Looking at both sets of cookies, both had the same basic batter. On the one on the right, I just added 1/4 cup more flour and 2 teaspoons of water because we're at higher elevation. And you can see that the thickness of this cookie compared to the thickness of the one I added more flour to.